in a record-setting demand where even the LBMA was kind enough to write a report explaining how their doors were getting blown off on Silver Squeeze weekend, and they actually were weeks away from running out of metal. Either case, these numbers showing a smaller deficit this year at negative 126.7 million ounces, but still a deficit nonetheless. Now we're in the midst of a global hyperinflation campaign. I mean, we're getting 7, 8, 9% inflation reports. Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics as we are in the midst of the holiday season. So happy holidays to everybody out there. And it's quite nice because tonight, well, it may look like two friends or brothers that are about to dig into the silver supply and see if they can figure out where the silver is going to come from, especially to meet all of the demand and the growing green demand, which is everywhere. Here on the front of CNBC today, you see EV stocks soared. All that stuff requires a lot of silver. And to dig in today, we have Steve Cope, who many of you have already seen on the show and know from Silver Viper Minerals. So Steve, welcome back on in. Great to see you. It's wonderful at Silverfest and nice to see you again today in the holidays. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Chris. It's always good to be on and fun. I think our very first one we ever did was over this same kind of time period, I think, right post Christmas. So it's awesome to be, on, and I'm looking forward to, what we're going to chat about today and seeing what happens in the new year here with silver and gold.
Yeah, a lot to dig into. And again, Silver Viper is Steve's company. So not just someone out of left field, but one of the people we're going to be counting on to bring silver to the world. So certainly a qualified opinion, although excitingly joined by his father, Gary Cope, not his brother, but his handsome father. Gary, welcome on in. We've been trying to get you guys paired up on the show for a while, but Gary from Barcelay Minerals, a member of the Belcar Management Group, who taught Steve at least a good portion of the things he knows and raised a silver mining genius. So Gary, great to have you today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Chris. And this should be a lot of fun. And we'll let Steve answer most of the silver questions, and I'll kick in what I can. So.
Okay, and Gary, before we start, can you give folks just maybe a minute on your background so they understand the experience you have and where you're coming from as we dig into silver supply today?
Well, I've been in the public mineral exploration business, I guess, since the 80s, 90s, and I was a stockbroker, and ended up having to take over a company that I had put a lot of my clients' money into, and that's how I sort of switched from being a broker into the running of companies. And I've been fortunate that I've been surrounded by some very, very capable people and knowledgeable and great geologists. And Steve followed me into the business after graduating university, and I'm glad he did, and he's doing a wonderful job. So
did Steve literally have a silver bar in his crib and that's how this all got started? Or
no, I don't think he had a silver bar. I think he just saw what I was doing and thought it would be an enjoyable path to follow.
And Steve, I mean, I guess there's been ups and downs on that one.
There's definitely been some ups and downs.
we won't ask if you take the redo, but I think there's something cool about being a silver investor. I mean, I guess, I don't know, probably any piker can follow a real estate bubble and jump on there. And I'm not trying to pick on the real estate guys, maybe a little bit, some of them, but silver, you really take some scars. I mean, you have that imprint of being hit over the head with a shovel multiple times because you have a lot of these things that are a little bit challenging to reconcile, at least to the logical and mathematical type style of thinking, which isn't very present on Wall Street these days. But now that we're rounding out to the end of 2021, I'm taking a look at these numbers. These are the Silver Institute, which I perhaps take with a grain of salt. So we'll leave that as it is. But in either case, you see total supply 2020, 976 million ounces. And then 2021, the forecast is for 1,000 or basically 1 billion, 1.05 billion ounces. Then we go down to the demand and you see, well, last year you cleared a bit. The difference was 80 million, but then you had 331 allegedly go into the silver ETFs, which left a 251 million ounce deficit. Now, gentlemen, maybe perhaps this is a good place to start. I get it that, you know, you've had a lot of the mine shutdowns recover. So perhaps we got up to this number, but in a record-setting demand where even the LBMA was kind enough to write a report explaining how their doors were getting blown off on Silver Squeeze weekend, and they actually were weeks away from running out of metal. Either case, these numbers showing a smaller deficit this year at negative 126.7 million ounces, but still a deficit nonetheless. Now we're in the midst of a global hyperinflation campaign. I mean, we're getting, 7, 8, 9% inflation reports. So, Gary, any thoughts on this overall supply and demand picture? You've been part of mining companies. Obviously, you speak with investors. So, what would you say on any of that?
Well, to be honest, I mean, I'm more focused on gold and silver, and I'll let Steve speak on silver. But it's obvious. Silver is a funny metal. I mean, it's very, very difficult to find a primary silver mine, and there are very few of them out there, and there's going to be less than that, and they're harder and harder to find. Most of the silver is a byproduct of other mines, and in that way, it's kind of been held captive by what copper prices do or what gold prices do, and like you say, the demand for silver in industrial use is going up like crazy, and will continue to go up. And what we haven't talked about, maybe on the silver side, is how the investment demand for the metal itself, like gold, is going to go up as well. And it's, silver is poor man's gold. And, it's nice to be able to buy something that looks big and instead of a few little tiny ounces for the same amount of money. So I think that's going to be a huge, part of the demand going forward is strictly in buying silver for the investment side as well.
Makes a lot of sense. Steve, what would you add to that?
Well, I agree. I mean, I think for me, the biggest thing forever is trying to really get investors more to look at silver from the industrial side. And I think, there's always been this pushback that, no, it has to be tied to gold. It has to be tied to gold. The historic of, when gold's going up, silver outperforms. When gold goes down, silver, does a lot worse. But I think moving forward, because of this just tremendous push around the world to, go green. Well, I'll say green because we can go further into details on how green it really is. But, just percentages of that demand, you don't have the supply of silver, and that chart starts to show. And one of the other things right off the bat on that chart, and I know I've talked, and it's come up on your show before, but the number that's attributed to recycling and how much you can actually recycle and recover of silver, and how, over exaggerated that number is, because it's so bound into so many of these components that you're never going to recover it. Right. So, we're just going to keep having a bigger and bigger shortage. And if, like you say, if people continue, to buy physical silver and that demand continues to grow, that's going to, eat away at it. But the biggest component is always going to be the electric cars and the solar and this push for the green energy, and the supply is not there. So you're going to have to, two things have to happen. One, we're going to have to magically find a bunch more silver that makes, economic sense at $20 an ounce, or we're going to have to start putting into production a lot of these projects that have been around for years and years and years that don't make sense unless we're, they're at a much higher level in silver and a sustained level in silver to bring them in line. Because like my dad said, there's not a lot out there, and it's harder and harder to find. So really we're going to need, $50 plus silver, $100 silver before you ever start putting on some of these mines that make sense, and the number can go a lot higher than that. But you need to see sustained levels well above that to bring in a lot of this new production.
Well,
And
and new production, Steve, doesn't happen overnight. I mean,
no,
you're gonna be,
it's a like the average was always 10 years, from a project, and that's probably getting longer now with governments becoming more stringent on permitting and other things that are happening. I think the timeline is even longer. But so what are we going to do? The only thing you're going to do is you're going to have prices have to skyrocket, or because we can see the inflation that's happening right now. We can see these costs that are rising in all of our daily lives, and you need, silver and a lot of this stuff that we're buying. So iPhones are going to cost a lot more. Your cars are going to cost a lot more, especially electric cars. In Canada, we don't have the same tax benefits that, Americans are getting to buy Teslas, but that's going to change. We get some, but not at the level that you get down there. It's just, we are at a precipice, and we're at a precipice where this has to break out, because it doesn't make economic sense, for the companies producing it to continue to do it at these prices. It needs to go up.
Yeah, Steve, a bunch of good points you had in there, because I mean, and that's the function the price will play, and why it has to adjust, and why the fact that if if it's low, it's going to, if it's artificially low, and my thesis is correct, then that will adjust at some point in time. And you mentioned a key factor that at the higher prices, you get some more projects turned on. But I ask you this, let's say we had $100 silver tomorrow. How much more supply would we have? And how long would it take to get there? Because I think that's something people don't often, it's like hard to put into context, but what would you say there?
Well, I mean, I think to a lot of it, it's actually, you're not going to change the number, that supply number, all that much, because at the same time that you're bringing on those new mines, you're depleting the reserves of the existing mines. I'm just saying, I think almost to sustain that level of supply, you've got to have prices go up to start justifying the new projects. Never mind, what can happen with the demand and the extra, uses of silver now that didn't exist a decade ago. I mean, we lost, obviously the big one used to always be photography, and we lost that when film went by the wayside. But that's been more than replaced on the industrial side. Certainly on, like you say, people that are now buying physical, and, credit to, the movements that you've started and reinvigorating the silverbug crowd. But those two far outnumber what we've lost from, photography, and then there's other uses in medical and other things that it's starting to come into. So like, I think just with reserves depleting, to keep that number and keep that supply number, you need to have prices go up to that level. If it's maybe you can raise it a bit, and if it goes up so dramatically, then you're going to start, maybe, the guys that run the big porphyries will start pushing a little bit harder to, push the envelope to produce more silver, because it becomes a more important component to their mind. But you need prices to go up just to sustain the supply level at what it is now.
And the supply level is being affected in not only silver, but all commodities, by the number of jurisdictions in the world that is shutting down mining, or because you as a miner, you can't have a safe title on your property. You might get a 50% windfall tax at any time. So the geographical places in the world that you can now safely mine has been shrinking, steadily. Every day, I think, we kind of laugh around our office about, oh, there's another country that we don't want to do business in. We don't want to go to explore there. That's a huge part of what's coming ahead. I mean, countries that used to be, absolutely safe jurisdictions have now chased everybody away. Like countries like, Ecuador. Now we even have one of the best mining countries in the world. Peru is starting to have problems, and
Chile,
Chile, Argentina. These were mining centers, and now there's problems getting new licenses and keeping your, some places don't want open pit anymore, and if you don't have open pit, there's a lot of deposits that'll never be mined underground because they just don't make sense. Maybe at $100 an ounce, some of them will, but then you're talking, like Steve says, up to 10 years from start to get a project into production. So it's not going to be easy keeping up with the demand. It's obviously going to get worse, and when it gets worse, if we're in free markets, you're going to have the prices have to go up, and that's what we've all been waiting for. That's why we're still in this business. We've gone through hell and been patiently waiting for for free markets and the real prices to in the commodities where they should be.
Yeah, and I think the wait will in the end be justified and worth it, if that helps anyone in this holiday season. Although, Steve, something that I'd love to get your comment on, because it's almost hard to put in perspective yet. Sometimes as I just read and get more familiar with some of the different companies, here we have Endeavor Silver, one of the larger primary producers. Again, I hear it's about 70-30, 70% of the supply comes from non-primary miners. So those are companies that, if the silver price goes up to $50, they're not going to start digging more copper because of that. And then you look at a company like Endeavor, third quarter highlights, 1.3 million ounces. They withheld a little production, but it's not like there's silver companies out there where it's like, all right, First Majestic, they're cranking out 150 million ounces a year and they'll just tack on another 50. I mean, these are some of the bigger companies. We're less than 5-10 million ounces per year. There's not like some big Coca-Cola factory out there where like, all right, we'll leave the machines on overnight. It's going to create a problem.
It's a huge problem. I mean, and to the point where, I mean, the traditional silver producers, the larger ones than, Endeavor and First Majestic, when we start talking about, the Pan Americans and the Fresnils and that of the world. But they're not even silver companies that really, or especially Pan American. I mean, Pan American's about 70% gold production now in their company. I mean, again, it's just the assets that were out there for them to acquire, they don't exist. There's very few of them, or they're, too expensive to buy right now because, like a company like Silvercrest, who's been one of the best, and even they've got a large gold component as well. But, they've done such a good job marketing, and their market caps are so high that at these levels and these prices of silver, it doesn't make sense for one of those big companies to come in and buy them yet. What I really think is going to happen, and again, the pressure that to me that's going to be on is going to be on the Teslas and some of the other car companies of the world, and I think they're going to change up the supply chain, and they're going to start acquiring some of these on their own and hire experts to go and put their own mines into production to secure their own supply. Because like you say, we've got this number of supply, and we can see what's going to happen on the industrial side and the demand when it comes for these cars and the infrastructure and that, and there's going to be so much demand that it's going to make sense for Apple and Tesla and whoever else in this world to start privately going out and acquiring mines, hiring experts, bringing them in to run the mine, or contract miners to do stuff, and then they can secure their own supply, and it'll start coming from their mines. And that, I know there's been whiffs of that, but they hasn't started yet. But I think as they really start to feel that supply crunch, they're going to really ramp up and start doing that themselves.
Yeah, I would imagine so. In fact, I heard one company tell me they've been getting more requests. I've actually had people ask me if there's a way to buy, a couple different groups, if there's a way to get the metal direct. Again, one last one on the supply side. Here you see, again, Endeavor at quarter end, we held over 1 million ounces of silver and 1,200 ounces of gold bullion. We expect to sell this inventory in the coming months. So they're taking supply off the market.
Yeah.
First Majestic's taking supply off the market, and Gary, at least in a more traditional non-Wall Street market, when the supply goes down as demand is increasing, that usually portends good things for that market, even if we've not seen it yet in silver. Is that right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I was just looking at the statistics you put up there for Endeavor Silver. It's very interesting to see how low, in a company that, like you say, is one of the main silver, companies. You want to compare that to, I'm just throwing out a number here, the Penasquito mine in Mexico produces 30 million ounces of silver as a byproduct every year. You know, I mean, to see that and compare that to Endeavor, I mean, it's just, and that's one mine, you know, that's operating by the giant companies. You know, that's a big mine in Mexico, but silver's, you know, and I don't know half as much as a tenth as much as you do on silver, Chris, but it's always been, to me, and I've run silver companies, it's always been the metal that confuses me, you know, as to supply demand and what that ounce of silver should be realistically cost. And there's no question in my mind that, you know, currently in the recent past, we're way undervalued on silver, and you know, we can talk and speculate on who's controlling that price and why they do that, but silver's got to go up. I mean, it's you know, I see a lot of experts predicting that that's the metal to be in the future, and I agree. You know, when you look at the numbers you're showing your readers and on demand and that, you know, silver has to go up, and it has to go up not a little bit, it has to go up a lot, and it will, I believe, and I hope I'm still running companies and watching Steve run Silver Viper when that happens, because shareholders are going to finally get really rewarded.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And Gary, I know you're not as focused on the silver world as perhaps Steve and I, yet I'm sure this is something gold investors would probably want to be aware of too. Just a quick highlight. Again, this is the commissioner, acting chairman of the CFTC, fellow named Ross Benham. And here was his comments, which he didn't really tell to everyone except for the banker committee, but following Silver Squeeze weekend. And like you said, Gary, often it's confusing why some of these things happen in silver. And this is why I feel it's important to point this out, because here Ross explains it.
And in many respects, the resiliency and the market structure of the futures market really were able to tamp down what could have been a much worse situation in the silver market.
Well, there you go. Factoring in that this guy's also part of the plunge protection team as the chairman of the CFTC. So basically, we could debate, you know, the efficacy of the legal mandate, but under Reagan, when they decided they didn't like having the housing bubble they inflated then crash, they said, all right, well, we'll cook up the working group on capital markets so they can rig things. And you hear him explain exactly why silver has reacted counterintuitively. But with that aside, you did touch on the demand half of this, and we'll dig into that for a moment here, because again, EV stocks soared. You know, investors are betting 2022 will be the year when they actually bring revenue. Now, it's amazing how some of these miners, you know, they don't hit like the exact number of ounces per quarter and they get hammered. Yet here, I think this puts it in perspective. Nikola shares surged 20% after company delivers its first EV truck. So, I mean, what happens if, you know, some of the mining stocks ever get rewarded like that, where, I mean, you know, Steve showed up at work today, Silver Viper up 20%. He turned the lights on, another 10%. I mean, it's interesting to think if silver followed a similar trajectory to not only Bitcoin, but the stock market or the bond market, or basically any other asset on the planet that has skyrocketed in dollar price as we've seen a hyperinflation of the currency. So Gary, what would you say about some of these companies that are making a fortune based on this electric vehicle revolution?
Well, it's the flavor of the day, right? It's, you know, I saw a stat the other day, Tesla's market cap is greater than all of the other car manufacturers in the world put together. And yet, you know, does Tesla make money yet? I don't know if they're making any money yet or not, but certainly their market cap is crazy. You know, it's up in the, you know, but I mean, I mean, I shake my head. I see IPOs come out that are just ridiculous. I mean, just to get off topic a bit, and you can reel me in, but you know, was it just a couple of years ago that a company called Shake Shack came out with an IPO, and it was in the billions. And when you looked at Shake Shack, they had something like 5 trucks at the time, you know. And you know, the Wall Street guys got together and they just make these artificial deals, and people buy the stock because, you know, Morgan Stanley or JP Morgan is telling them this is a great deal. Well, you know, some of the stuff is ludicrous, and don't get me going, because I'll start getting on Bitcoin as well. But anyway.
Well, I think what you said makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you mentioned that, because part of the challenge is that at the same time people invested in silver are watching their investments get pummeled. They're seeing all their friends and everybody who piled into Tesla or these other companies. And I guess maybe that's what is required to do something like you saw the investors in The Big Short do, where they all faced that long period of waiting. And but I guess that, to me, as time goes by, I just think more and more that, all right, there's a way that the world is, whether it's the way I thought it was or it should be. You know, the more I can relate myself to what is and let go of those preconceived notions. And I think that helps a little bit, because in the end, all right, if the silver price is low, then I try and take advantage of the time by buying more silver related assets, putting businesses in place that will benefit from that. And perhaps we'll make that the last question, just if anything along those lines or any other advice that you would pass along to silver investors. That I think the numbers are clear when they're pointed out, but sometimes it's really just staying true to what you know and what you believe. But Steve, what would you say about that?
Well, I mean, again, I've never been one to invest, you know, after things go up. And one of the best investment approaches that has always worked for me, and I've seen work for people that have a lot more money than I do, is being a contrarian and trying to pick the sectors that have been held down and get involved with them when they've been held down, because those are the ones that at some point you're going to have the lift and the run, you know, that you have. If you jump in and become, you know, a sheep and follow everyone else, oftentimes you get in right at the end, right before things fall off a cliff. And I don't like the idea of that. So to me, be contrarian and focus on, you know, stuff that has a sound investment thesis. I mean, obviously we're biased, but precious metals certainly has a great investment thesis right now and has been held down. And I think there's going to be a fundamental shift as we move forward here. I mean, one of the things we've talked about, we keep going back to the electric car companies and seeing what they're doing. And I think one of the big things that's gone on our sector is the disconnect, and we need to market more and more, especially on the silver side, that this is a green metal. You know, copper, silver, you know, these different things are the green metals that are needed for these companies that have run. So you would, in a normal market where things aren't manipulated and changed, these companies should have run up as the companies that produce the products that are needed for those green vehicles and solar, and they should have exponentially gone up at the same time that Teslas and Apples and everyone else are running like crazy. But we have this disconnect of people's mindsets that mining is evil and mining isn't green. But to have your green vehicles, you need to have this mining, and you need to have a lot more of it to meet the demand in this green sector. So I think people are going to slowly figure that out, and maybe the timing is like what I mentioned earlier, is as you start to see, you know, some of these private companies start to take over and manage and run their own mines to produce the product, that you'll see that exponential growth, and our stocks will start to perform the way they should be performing in this, you know, demand market that we're in.
Well, I think that's pretty well said. And Dad of Steve, what would you say? Any thoughts on silver or Steve's success as we wrap up here today?
Well, I think everybody, and if they can, they should have some physical gold and physical silver. You know, we're, like you mentioned very early in the interview, that we're heading towards hyperinflation, and you can look at a lot of things, but the safest thing to have to protect you against hyperinflation are gold and silver. So, and maybe platinum or palladium if you can get it. But it's is advice to people. Have some physical, and then if you want to invest in companies, look at jurisdiction management and records of what the grade is and what the resources are in those companies, and check off boxes. The easiest way I think to look at investing in companies is to go through a checklist and see how many boxes don't get checked, and those are the ones you should avoid. So no, I enjoyed the interview, and I congratulate you, Chris, on the pushing of this silver story. It's something that most people don't understand and don't realize what's gone on in the past, and hopefully what goes on in the future that can make us all a lot of money and hopefully get back to free markets.
Yeah, well, I sure appreciate that. And I mean, it is quite a fascinating story that I remember there were times in the past decade where I wondered whether it was time to do something else in life, and figured just people should, it was just wild beyond belief, let alone the things I'm reading about now as I read books about Hunt Brothers era and what really happened there. But we'll leave that aside for today. Gary, can you let folks know if they have questions about mining, or if they would like to find out more about you and some of the projects you are participating in? Can you give them the address and where they can find you there?
Well, Steve and I are both in the Belcarra group. We have the 3 public companies and one private one that's going to go public, and Steve's going to head up that company as well. That'll be Kraken Minerals. Steve, maybe you can just if you want to give out email addresses.
No, it's easy to reach us at, I mean, they're on the websites as well, but info@barceliaminerals.com is an email there that comes to all of us, info@Silver Viper Minerals. But again, like, we all work together. I help out on Barceli marketing, and Alicia as well works on all 3 companies. And I help out on Orex Minerals, which is the 3rd company within our group that's silver focused in Mexico. So it's a group that likes to focus on jurisdictional, especially with jurisdictional risk heavily in mind when we pick where we work, with a track record of success. Gary never even mentioned it, but again, when his last big success in the industry was a company that we put the very first drill hole into and grew it to 270 million ounces of silver. So he's very familiar with silver and has run companies with a silver focus, and that was Orco Silver in Durango, Mexico. So again, if you're, I'll say it because he hasn't said it about his company. If you're looking for an undervalued gold company with a large resource that is heavily undervalued relative to the metals, you should certainly be looking at Barceli Minerals, which trades as BME on the TSX Venture, or BRSLF on the OTC. That is definitely a company you should all be looking at, and I expect some really big things moving forward on that company. Again, that's in northern Sweden. And then you've got Silver Viper, VIPR on the TSX Venture, VIPRF on the OTCQB. And then you've also got Orex, which is Rex on the Venture, and or MNF on the QB. So again, it's a group that has a large track record. We've got a lot of geologists with a lot of experience and noses for discoveries. And it's one that the funds tend to invest in and get involved with, again, because they respect the level of work that we do. And also the senior mining companies. We've had partnerships with most of them at various points in various companies. Barceli right now is a joint venture with Agnico Eagle. Orex has Fresnillo and Pan American Silver as partners. We've worked with Orco Silver sold in a bidding war between Coeur and First Majestic, with Coeur ultimately just outbidding Keith at the last second on that one. Again, they get involved with us. We partnered with Hecla before on Dolly Varden Silver when we were running it. It's a group. I think it's a great group when you're looking and checking off boxes that we check off a lot of them, and especially the companies right now check off all those boxes. So please reach out if you have any more questions. We're always available to chat with anyone. And again, we look forward and wish everyone a happy holiday season and a Merry Christmas, and hopefully a very prosperous New Year and with gold and silver prices.
Well, I appreciate that, Steve. I appreciate that, Gary. And by the way, if you have any of those silver mines down in Mexico, you need me and someone and their dog to watch over, make sure all the silver stays there. Just let me know where to go. I'll see you down there and guard it. But great to catch up with you before the end of the year. And Gary, it's a pleasure to have you on the show for the first time. And we'll have to do this again soon. I think it's going to be, I think 2022 will be the year where people finally get some sort of payoff on their patience. So it'll be fun to follow. And again, all the links to all those companies and the emails in the description field below. And we will see you again soon.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.